Platypus Playground. I have my friend Ben with me today. We're going to be talking about some interesting things. Um, Another friend of mine will be joining us a little bit later. I have no idea when to expect him, but some of the fun things we'll talk about today are in the realms of religion, politics, and culture, how all of these intersect and how they're impacting us as older Gen Z, millennials, etc. And so, without further ado, let's get started. Everyone has met Ben before. I interviewed him way back in the day, in the early days of my channel. And we were talking about construction back then. So,
Yeah,
but
such a short
today
time
we
to go.
something like that. But today we're talking about something a little bit more impactful, I think, because Ben had a unique experience today. You care to share?
I revisited my church from which I've been inactive for 18 months. There remain feelings for that crowd and for the shared behaviors that keep peace among people and create harmony and a healthy lifestyle, with which I cannot shake the goodness of it. And yet I can never again endorse the narrative with which they motivate people to live that life.
I did have a random question for you, Ben. So I just thought of this. President Nelson died literally a week after Charlie Kirk was shot. So, what was the sentiment at church when you went?
There was no talk of Charlie Kirk. It was one of those days.
Hmm. Interesting. What was the environment and energy like when people were talking about the incoming prophet or whatnot?
There wasn't a whole lot that grasped my attention. More than anything, I was taken aback by a trans person coming up and, first off, being there at all. This trans woman came up and for her testimony of some things, even though she has combative, or not combative, even though she has issues with the church and she's gone to the Capitol to protest the way certain people are treated. We all know what she was talking about. And it was interesting to even see her there at all. And she's like making a comeback to church, it seems, from prior sentiments that would have her not there.
This
So it's all
sounds
very
familiar.
it's all very complicated. I'm sure you've lived a similar experience.
Well, what sounds familiar to me isn't just the experiences, but it sounds like you actually went to the church building that I used to go to with my husband when we were dating. Was this the one in downtown Salt Lake off of State
Not downtown.
Street?
No. It's just south of the I-80 east.
Oh, okay. Never
I,
mind. Different church
it,
building.
it's a very historic looking building with
Hmm.
very very carved lines into the plaster. So,
Interesting. Sorry, just trying to get a little bit more comfortable. I don't have a back rest, so um,
me neither.
well, that makes two of us. Um,
So
that's
they did.
wild because, like, so when my husband and I were going to church when we just barely, I want to say we had been together for like 6 months, but we had all of these unique experiences and including a trans person who was partially disabled in a wheelchair and all that. And so that's why your little example there kind of brought some memories forward. I was like, I wonder if this is the same church building. But I've walked away from the church for various reasons, and I can't discount some of the opportunities that I had, and I'm sure you're the same way. But I feel like a lot of what we're experiencing right now, especially in politics, has to come from dogmatic religious views. People have called me dogmatic on my own channel, but I don't think people realize what that word means. You know what I mean? Because the word dogma itself doesn't mean bias, it doesn't mean religious point of view. Dogma means violent disagreement to the point of not just putting someone down, but blatantly attacking or killing someone over your beliefs. Dogma happens usually in ultra conservative backgrounds, like, for example, in Muslim households or Islamic households, there's a lot of kids who are in the LGBT community, teenagers who end up um, becoming unalived, if you will, because of the shame and guilt they feel.
Even though they
And
don't know that themselves, because they are convinced so much that the natural patterns that they are living out and experiencing are a crime against the Lord, a crime against
yep,
their creator.
and that happens all the time. Even like I grew up Mormon, you grew up Mormon, that happened all the time. And yet, you know, my parents, other people's parents would say things like, "Hey, do not go hang out with this person because their influence, their queerness may rub off on you and that'll impact you and make you gay." That's not how that works, by
I
the way.
recall a seminary teacher telling me, after I came to the conclusion I would not be serving a mission, that non-return missionaries are creepy. And that just dug a hole in my heart when she said that to me, because I felt like a lesser human being.
It's so wild to me that that's kind of like the rhetoric that people go with, and they say that that's not harmful because everything has a consequence, right? Newton, Einstein, they all talked about these things, and everything has both a positive and negative consequence. If you do something charitable, you might experience inadvertent negative consequences, right? Troubled finances, other problems with your physical health. But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's the universe correcting course for too much positivity, too much negativity,
And
right?
even for, I like to speak for both of us, I think, in saying that we're not here to tear down the church. We're here
No,
to lighten up a higher truth, which
exactly.
happens to not entirely include the church as it is.
I would strongly agree with that. Um, I mean, because let's be honest here, there are certain ancient truths that predate Christianity or any Abrahamic religion, whether it's Judaism, Islam, or Christianity, right? The big three. But outside of that, there are some symbolic truths that are very, very impactful that people aren't thinking about and taking into consideration, right? Buddhism is very much a faith of pacifism. It really is. But there's certain things that people don't talk about, right? We talk a lot about the Crusades. That was Christianity's huge push for unification at the cost of human life, right? Then you had the Assassins, which were a group of Islamic extremists around 1500 years ago that tried to do the same thing to Christians, Jews, Taoists, and Buddhists. They tried to wipe them clean off the face of the earth because they believed that their religion was the only end all be all. And then you have the Jews, right? The Hebrews, if you will. They were a group of people that were captured and brought into slavery, supposedly, but there's recent evidence that showcases the only people that were imprisoned were the ones that were violently breaking the Babylonian laws. Now, you saying that out loud, that goes against the Abrahamic way of the world, right? Like some of these people naturally assimilated into Babylonian culture, and all of this kind of came to be just this huge mess of, you know, the Hebrew people didn't like what they were seeing with the Babylonians. And so what did they do? They took some of the culture from the Babylonians, wrapped it in a shroud or a shawl of Hebrew religious view. And that's how we ended up with these scriptures and a lot of our biblical stories, including elements from the Torah, even some stuff, not just from the Bible, but from the Quran. All of these religious texts share the same basic root in Babylonian theology and culture.
I mean,
So
look at
what
all the
does that
culture just around Christmas
what?
itself. Look at all the things around
Oh
Christmas
yeah,
itself. How much of that borrowed itself from Norse culture? Yuletide,
exactly.
and
Uh,
yeah,
even
as it also
caroling is
mirrors
not
Eastern
a
religion.
Christian tradition.
Even
And
what?
so caroling isn't even a Christian tradition either. And so
Right.
all of this stuff really kind of flips things on their head. But I really think that a lot of people, perpetuate these ideas of strength, and they are like, yo, look at me. I am really, really smart here for being able to manipulate people.
I think
But
uh,
the
I think those that come after us will even look at Christmas and say, "Look how capitalism merged into the Christian tradition."
I absolutely think that will be a thing. Like 100 years, 200 years from now, absolutely, I think that'll be a thing.
I think people are already saying it, but it's just not written clearly yet
No, no,
for kids.
and I hear things from like Islamic families, Christian and Jewish families, and they say, "Oh, we're the ones having kids, and so therefore we're going to be the ones that reshape the future through moral purity." If you look at percentage wise, Christians and Muslims make up 50% of the global population for religious support, right? And it's nearly split equally between Muslim and Christian. Um, and obviously, there's different degrees of Islamic faith and there's different degrees of Christianity, right?
There's
S-
kind of a catch-22 with that because those that are in the hardcore sense of our religion is going to dominate, they inevitably create or they inevitably bring children that are very literate because they've studied their books. And where does that literacy almost always drive them towards? Higher education. If they don't actually pursue it, at least they have a knack for teaching themselves without any other good books. Because if you can read the
mhm.
Quran, if you can read the Torah, if you can read the Bible, if you can read the Book of Mormon, chances are you're in the top 10 percentile of literate people.
I strongly agree with that.
And there's
But
a good chance you're going to find yourself in one of these paths that gives you a higher education. I don't have a formal degree, but I read more than most tradesmen that I know. So I tend to have discussions with people who have degrees with a clarity that they wouldn't know I didn't have a degree if I didn't tell
I was reading a fascinating article. Just under 64% of people who grew up in religious families end up walking away from the church or from their mosques. And I find that really interesting. And the reason why I find that interesting is because what's being talked about on over the pulpit, right? What are they talking about in these prayers and meditation that so misaligns with being educated that people change their worldview almost overnight?
I want to say yes and I want to say no. There is this whisper of progressivism working its way into the church and so many of its people. There are so many people that are taking a softer approach than their parents did, at least in the LDS church, which I can speak for. And they don't
Mhm.
want to be so orthodox. They don't want to be so controlling. They don't want to incite such a guilt trip to children who decide that the faith is not the path they want to walk. And I don't know. I feel like it's a more open door than it's ever been for people to walk away if their conscience doesn't keep them there.
No, and I totally agree with that. I really think that what we're seeing is a huge push towards independent religious belief versus, people following blindly. I'm seeing this every single day. Like when we talk about like the things that happened to Charlie Kirk, do we condone what happened? No. But, like I was telling you earlier, as a Buddhist, I truly believe that when you pigeonhole yourself, You know what I mean? Like you're really shooting yourself in the foot, because what Charlie did when he would speak is he was talking about absolute truth as though the only arbiter of truth was Christianity, even though I think it was Paul. Maybe actually, yeah, no, it was the admiration of Paul where he said, if anything is trustworthy or of good rapport, we seek after these things, right? That's not only in the Bible, there's elements of that same thought process in the Torah, the Quran, and other religious texts that are thousands and thousands of years older. Like Taoist principle, same thing. Even in Buddhism, there's a idea of impermanence, right? That same logic tracks, right? Because you're looking for the things that not just matter in the moment, but the things that align with your soul. And so Charlie Kirk had this bad habit of saying things in a very much absolute way. It is this way. It will only be this way. Thus saith the Lord. Right? When you go through, sorry, go for it.
I think that absolutism sort of has a feedback loop with ego and with a desire for
Mm,
control. Like those that have a big ego, they need something absolute to lean on.
no,
Or
I
those
yeah, I
that
agree.
are so insecure that they need to lean on another ego, the kind of people that tend to be the favorite prey of narcissists. Or those kind of people need another big ego to lean on. They don't have their own ego to lean on, so they find a narcissist who has such a grandiose ego. I have the best ego. You can all follow me. They lean towards somebody like that who speaks with such absolute
Yeah,
certainty in spite of absolute BS behind the language. Because, well, at least he sounds like he knows what he's talking about, so I can get behind that. That's my guy.
give me
People
one
follow
minute.
relationships. Go ahead.
Give me 1 minute. I'm closing the door real quick.
Sure thing. Yeah, people who follow
I'm
that
back. There we go.
interpersonal relationships and professional relationships and political relationships. Like people don't generally think of who they follow in politics as a political relationship, but it really is. If you
Oh
have
yeah,
a strong tie towards somebody who speaks publicly and your version of truth is influenced heavily by what they say, even if it's to the contrary of what they say, you have a relationship with that politician.
exactly. Well, and here's something interesting. Like, I don't know if you saw this recently, but there's an argument in the archaeological community because there's some evidence, not a lot, and it's non-conclusive. So everybody, do your own research as I say this. But there is quite a bit of evidence that showcases that the three wise men were actually either Taoist or Buddhist monks. They weren't Hebrews at all.
What's interesting is that they have a depiction of these Middle Eastern travelers in most of our artwork. So it kind of leaves an open door. Like, who were they even?
Exactly.
Frankincense, or, uh, frankincense, gold, and myrrh. Like, what kind of places do those gifts come from? Not anywhere near Europe.
No, a lot of those types of things would I think you can find all three of those things in Tibet, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's why some of this archaeological research has begun, because people are curious about what is going on, where this is coming from, and how this intersects with modern theology. But I think what's crazier that no one's talking about is that when it comes to religion as a whole, that a lot of people aren't making the correlation that politics and government structure are religion. Babylonian culture and religion was 100% dependent on the gods. Um, there's a
Right.
lot of scripture.
How much
Oh,
of our
sorry.
legal structure is based around biblical styling of language? The Ten
Exactly.
Commandments. Go on.
Well, And here's something crazier. Like people say, "Oh, we live in the higher law," right? We live in the New Testament world, right?
Higher than what? That's all.
Exactly. We live in the higher law. And here's where I start to debunk this a little bit, right? We're not talking about hoaxology from the American debunk, which we'll get to
I don't
later.
care to talk about or entertain that poor level of thinking. But go on.
But here's what's wild is that people are talking about how everything kind of intersects, right? But I think what people are forgetting and negating to acknowledge is that when you say we live the higher law, I'm going to be vulgar here for a minute. You better fucking mean it, right? There's no room for not just hypocrisy, but a convoluted mess between the law of Moses and the new law.
I mean, the higher law just is also verbal bait for the ego. It's like
I don't know if I agree with that. I
uh,
really don't know.
it means you're able to dismiss something and say we're better than that, in spite of not being
Oh,
apart from that. We live the higher law.
do you think it's a lack of accountability? Do you think that's what it is?
That's just another thing that invites the language and the mindset. They don't
Okay.
want to be accountable for the horrendous things and the horrendous patterns painted in the Bible. The reign of David and Solomon were not a pretty picture.
No. Well, and what's weird to me is that you have all of this going on, right? But the higher law means not only turning the other cheek, but not just asking for forgiveness. It's about trying to turn a new leaf, but that's something you have to do internally. This is why I think all Christians, all Muslims, all Jews should be against the death penalty. But guess what? If you take a poll, about 70% of Abrahamic faithful people believe that the death penalty is okay.
I am not a Buddhist like you. I turn to nature for its best models, for its finest models, and within the body itself, especially in times of famine. Do you know what autophagy is?
It sounds vaguely familiar, but go ahead.
It's something that happens in fasting right around, I believe, 12 to 16 hours. Your body begins to digest the cells that it deems sickest, weakest, most unfit, etc. And it's kind of a scaling down. Like if you really look at what cells get attacked first and turned into nutrients first, they go after the weak, they go after the unfit, they go after the unserving. Any, like in a internal body sense, this is actually the healthiest process you
Hmm.
could possibly imagine. But nobody wants to apply that to society when they talk about a homeless schizophrenic. It's painful to think about because that's somebody's brother, sister, daughter, child, cousin, etc. Like it's a loved one. So like it's a hard thing to couple. I'm not saying we should actually exactly euthanize them, but I am saying that natural processes will bring an end to those that serve no function. And capitalism seems to just do that by leaving them on the streets and exposed to the elements to where they will die for lack of help. So it's not like it's something we don't already do. We just do it in a turning a blind eye kind of way.
No, and I hear where you're coming from there, but from my point of view, right? For example, Tyler Robinson, do I believe he should be put to death if he is found guilty? I do not believe that because from my worldview, if you want to fix our culture, fix what's wrong with politics and government, you have to meet in the middle. And what does that take? It takes not only compassion, and it definitely doesn't mean we should just release that individual back into public life, right? But it does mean you have to not only reconcile with the action, you have to find a way to reintegrate into society and make amends with the family you caused harm to. People believe in the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but that's just the law of Moses nonsense that we've heard our entire life. And I don't believe that's correct. And I truly believe
Fact,
this. Like,
simple fact that every adult has no capacity to pay back their parents for the contributions they made to them being whole and functional adults.
exactly.
You're never going to repay every debt.
No, no. And I think this zero sum game of being able to, you know, pay back all of your debts and move forward in a honest way is nearly impossible, right?
Right.
There's all of these ideas about how we can fix society, but I think a first step, a really strong first step, would be having an honest conversation on how we can help people that are misguided who felt like their only course of action was doing something destructive,
Hmm.
right?
I mean, how many
Because
revolutions have been incited by people being pressed into the point of desperation and deciding, well, this is no life this is no life worth living. At least I may die for a cause. The French Revolution, the American Revolution, and nearly every other democratic revolution that's ever taken around the globe. Somebody decided that fighting was better than living in the system they had.
yep.
Possibly dying was better than living in the system that they had. So this is not an endorsement for violence. However, I do understand the sentiments that lead to it.
No, and I totally see it too. I just think there are better ways.
There's always
And
better
maybe
ways.
that
Most people don't bear the intelligence to find them.
that's also true. I think like what we're doing right here, though we may disagree and come from different perspectives, this right here showcases more about what we can do in an honest environment to try and rectify differences and find not just common ground and agree to disagree. And we're not debating, we're not arguing, we're not chastising one another. We're giving each other new perspectives to think about, right? Because my backstory is that Charlie Kirk literally brainwashed me. I remember being 21 in 2016, and that's when Trump ran for president the first time. And I worked on the Trump campaign. I was young, naive, didn't know any better, and I was still in the closet. But I was so hateful towards myself that I started being very destructive to my body. I was smoking, and for anybody who has a loved one with addiction, you should be trying to understand the why instead of condemning them or condemning the action, right? This idea of love the person, hate the sin is incredibly counterintuitive and destructive.
I mean,
Does
they also
not
say
work.
addiction is connection. So if you're cutting off connections because someone's addicted, you're only driving them further into addiction.
Yep. And, you know, for any gay kid growing up, when you hear things like, ew, that is so disgusting. I can't believe you would want to live like that. Oh, I'm sorry that you like this person who just happens to be gay. Oh, I'm sorry you are following this musician who supports gay people. They're going to destroy our country. Oh, they're going to destroy, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Whatever the reason is, you start to
Tony
believe it,
Club.
right? And you don't even have to be queer to understand that because you hear things like, oh, by the way, if you don't believe what I believe, you're damned, right? That's so counterintuitive to what we should be doing. We should be focusing on how we can help people. And I think what's really sad is that we don't do that. We don't do that enough.
You know what that really is? You know what that sense of you're damned after this life? It's an outsourced sentiment of violence. You want this person to burn in hell for eternity? If you wish that on anybody, how can you not call yourself a violent person? You're just happy that someone else unseen is going to do the job for you. But you're violent.
Exactly. And with everything that we're experiencing right now, right? We hear people like Parker or like Dean. I don't know if anyone follows them, but they're fantastic. They're wonderful young men that are out there doing things in a very, at times, I would think more destructive, right? But that's more because of my spiritual lens. But
Well,
they are bringing some awareness to people that need it.
I'm gonna say this: if Charlie Kirk could, in the wrong way, influence people towards a destructive mindset, is it possible that Dean and this other guy could use the same method to influence people for a better way of thinking? I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying I can see
Mm.
why they're trying to do it so assertively. Like, it's
When you
better to
Yeah.
be wrong in how you do it than to let society get to a wrong place.
Well, when you say it like that, I think that makes more sense. And I think the weird thing for me, right? People will say, "Oh, well, in the next life, your homosexuality is not going to be an issue. Your blindness is not going to be an issue." And I don't think those are things. I don't think we should be thinking that way
I
because that
had
just
There was a great discussion in church today talking about neurodivergence. The teacher was bipolar, and he talked about, you know, there are actually some superpowers and advantages that come with the neurodivergence. And I myself, I have ADD, and I'm a little anxious sometimes. I'm a little hypervigilant, which actually makes me an excellent construction worker. I can't not sense the details and dangers around me and, help prevent incidents from happening that could happen. Now, I'm going to make a broader term and just call it divergence. I'll call homosexuality a divergence from norm. It's divergence from baseline. I mean, I hate to touch on this one because it tries to lump all gays into a category, but I'm going to say it anyway. The arts and gays, we know there's a correlation. Like, there's so many homosexuals that have been absolute superstars in the arts, and you might argue they never would have gotten there if not for the whole picture of who they are and their particular way of life. And you yourself, you're one of the most studious people that I know. There's certain influences that have not afflicted your life the way it does an average heterosexual man. And in those things, I kind of envy you sometimes.
well, thank you. I
I'm
mean,
not going to say women are the problem and you're away from that. No, but it's a whole package of things that you've had to think outside the box just to cope with yourself and to learn to love yourself. And most people don't have the push to do that.
no. And this is something I've come to really believe in recently is that like I'm saying with like the Charlie Kirk stuff and the Dean and or with Dean and Parker, not the Dean, but Dean and Parker, a
Well,
little
yeah,
bit
yeah.
of vulnerability goes a long way, right? Because these two young men are very vulnerable. They acknowledge where they are right, they acknowledge where they are wrong, and they're not afraid to question other people's facts, feelings, or emotions. But there's something recently that I've discovered, and it's kind of mind blowing a little bit. It's the idea that a lot of these people who followed Trump for whatever reason, they're being fed a narrative to the point where they have created their own self fulfilling prophecy of what's right and what's wrong, and that anything any Democrat or liberal thinker is wrong. How destructive is that? That's incredibly destructive, right?
I think only
Because
5% of the population actually identifies themselves as MAGA. They're just a very loud 5%.
they are a very loud 5%, and it's kind of destructive. And I think it disincentivizes a lot of people, right? Because a lot of people will think that that's the majority.
Well,
Uh,
okay, I'm just going to say this. The part of the liberal crowd that people don't like are either trying to cancel somebody or trying to gripe and whine to a higher authority. Like, when are they going to take authority in their own hands? When are they going to be assertive themselves? Because
Mm,
I'm not going to say all of them. There are definitely some assertive Democrats out there, but there are just so few of them. Like most people are drawn to the Democratic Party because they need to be defended by somebody else, not because they themselves are characters capable of defending somebody. Yeah, am I right or wrong? Am I hyperfixating on the frail few? Or
I
what?
don't know. But the one thing I do think, at least in this instance, right, is that a lot of people think that we are I don't even know what to call myself. I would like to consider myself a liberal thinker because I always challenge my narrative, right? Um, when I came out, I had to challenge everything that I thought I knew about myself, right? Because I would hear comments from my parents. Don't get me wrong, I love my parents if they're watching. Love you, promise. Um, but they would say things like, I know my son more than they know themselves. Do you really know me more than I know myself? Because I don't feel like I know myself at all. And I've been reintroduced to myself relatively recently. And I've come to find that I'm actually a relatively nice person. I used to think I was a very hateful, deceitful person, someone who was very aggressive and angry. I no longer believe that. And
Mhm.
thank goodness. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so, because of that, I think that a lot of people have certain challenges they need to overcome in order to be a little bit more open minded. For me, I believe that everything Charlie Kirk was saying was correct. He would go up there on the stages, very charismatic guy. He was so charismatic. Like me being 21, 22 years old, he would go up there and be like, "Hey, everybody, look at me. I can talk really fast, just like Ben Shapiro. I can do all of the things. I can do this, 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 and this. And by the way, um, some of my close friends are gay, but I think what they're doing is wrong because it's a choice." And then that's when you start feeling sick on the inside, especially as a queer individual, because you're like, I don't know who I am anymore.
As
I
much as
do
I
know.
disliked the general discourse of Charlie Kirk, I feel like he was a necessary evil
Mhm.
in the echo chamber that is modern academia. And anybody who's ever had to contrast it knows what I'm talking about. Like, imagine disagreeing with a therapist that's come to a certain conclusion about you and your neurodivergence and what you're supposed to do about it. What do you argue with? They have a credential from academia. And so they are a high authority and they're going to assert something that has to, utterly be enforced upon your life.
I love that.
But
There was
yeah, who's this high authority? Who's the first thinker that wrote the book that this academic had to read in order to earn their credential? They're treating that person as though they're some kind of god when really they're just a smart person who might have another smart person disagreeing with them.
oh, I definitely agree with that. And what's kind of profound here is that people don't realize that the intersection of politics and religion are a lot closer than people think, right? The Babylonians, like we discussed earlier, they built all of their cycles and their political values, their government, all on their gods, their beliefs, their culture. But culture ultimately is an embrace, right, of one's identity and what one believes. People say, "Oh, well, I don't like that. I don't like that TV show because there's a gay character. I don't like that because I disagree with blah blah blah," or what other scenarios they could give. Like in the 70s, Star Trek aired an episode where they land or crash land on a planet. I can't remember. This I saw this episode years and years ago. I was actually I think this was in 2016 when I started coming around to who I was. Um, but in this episode, they crash land on this planet where the planet is just lesbians. This episode aired either in the late 60s or early 70s. How wild is that? Um, and they're talking to each other like, wait, on your planet, do all women look like you as they're talking to a man? Right? Because they don't know anything different. If you don't know anything different, can you really assert dominance over someone else? Or do you just kind of go with the flow and say, I don't know. This is how it's always been for me, so it must be that way for everybody else. Do you assume it's the same for everybody else? Or do you just live in your own world, right?
And that's where pacifism is such a safe way to play because it makes room for your own ignorance. Like the second you
Exactly.
start being assertive on things, you start bearing the weight of if you're wrong, you're evil for doing what you're doing. If
Yeah.
you're wrong in the way you write a law that governs mankind, then you become the wrong side of history.
Yep. And I think the issue with that is that a lot of people don't understand how things kind of go together. Um, and people will look at the American Constitution and say, oh, see, it was inspired by God. But who's God?
Right.
Our founders were obsessed, not even a little curious, obsessed with Greek and Roman culture and society.
I reiterate Benjamin Franklin's words when he said, democracy is the worst form of government except every other kind that has been tried. He knew it had problems,
Oh, yes.
but everybody loved it more than monarchy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we don't really have to look back that far to understand what these people believed, because like Benjamin Franklin was one of my favorite people because he was so raw and authentically himself, right? He admitted that
Had to
he
say,
was for well, he would boast, well, not boastfully, but he would admit to anybody that he was fornicating with countless women, that he was both tinkering in his garage while learning how to be a nudist. Like he did all of these things at the same time, and yet they contradict each other in certain weird ways in the
only
way
in a
we
certain
think.
mindset. Only in a certain mindset. Like you
Exactly.
have to be truly honest with yourself and with everybody else to be a great thinker. And if that includes French whores, well, that's going to be part of the package.
Yep. And the fun part is he wasn't afraid to dabble in the other way. I don't know how far he did, but it is rumored and conceptualized to believe that he didn't just experiment with women, but with men and everything else in between, which is a little crazy to think about in today's standards, right? Because for the mid 1700s, you would be like, oh,
Yeah.
gasp. Yet he was able to do what he did. He survived, he persevered, and he invented and created many things that we still use today. One, he invented one of the first submarines. No one really knows that, right? People talk about certain things like the spork. Where on earth does the spork come from? That was actually from George Washington. When they left New York at the start of the Revolutionary War, um, they were so grateful to get out alive that they looked at all of the food and provisions that they had, and they had more than enough. And so they decided to have a feast on the other side of the river in New Jersey. And so what did they do? They looked at the cutlery they had. They wanted to have a formal feast, but they didn't have any forks or knives. So they cut into the spoons, fork teeth, and serrated the edges of the spoons so that that way they would have something that was slightly formal as a pat on the back to show that they escaped. There's something spiritually profound about that, right? And nowhere in that documentation of that experience and that moment was there any thanks to God. But Washington himself said, I must thank the nature around us for both being hospitable and honoring our presence. Like that that isn't someone who's dogmatically believing in, oh well, Christians are the only way to go. He was someone who was well rounded in both theology and the practicality of nature. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that's the direction we need to go. That's absolutely the direction we need to go. But we can't go that way unless we admit that Christianity has flaws. Abrahamic religions as a whole have flaws. But the best path forward is admitting what we need to do and how we need to fix it. Socialism by itself creates endless red tape, right? Capitalism unchecked might as well be a monarchy, right? But together, they create something profoundly beautiful that doesn't just put people first, but it balances need, want, and growth. That
So
that is systematically beautiful.
even if we were combative against religion, I recall something of a native proverb talking about uh, the arrow tied to the back, or sorry, the feather tied to the back of the arrow is the bird delivering to man the means of its own destruction. Like, so how do you catch your first bird to get more feathers to make more arrows to catch more birds? They shed them. And
Mhm.
sometimes they die and you take those feathers. It's like they deliver the means of their own destruction. Just like I was talking about religion delivering education to people that would otherwise not have it, and therefore raising this progressive math that may be atheist or agnostic or at least not so orthodox in the beliefs that they hold. Religion delivers the means of its own destruction by raising people up.
It does. But I think something more profound that very few do talk about is that when people truly believe one way and it's only that way, it's that same thing we talked about, right? My daddy was a coal miner, my granddaddy was a coal miner, therefore I will be a coal miner, but I start working in the coal mines and go, "Wow, this sucks. I'm done. I'm going to go be a baker." And then what happens? "Oh, no son of mine's going to be a baker. That's artsy. Get out of my house." And they become the most successful baker in the town. Is there any apology at any point between that father and son? Who knows? Very rarely is it the case that when something like that happens, is there any acknowledgement or apology from the parent that cast their own child out of their home because they disagreed with their life choices. And I think until we admit that people are going to people and they're going to do whatever they want, and we have our own individual interests, the world will never get better. It just
Behind every
won't.
great person is some kind of trauma driving them.
Usually. I
And
mean,
religion tends to traumatize a lot of its dissidents who
mhm,
go on to be great in their own rights in other places because they have something to prove against those that said they never could.
yep. I mean, just as a whole, and maybe this ties to what we're talking about, I was pulled over and got a speeding ticket. I didn't realize what the speed limit was. I'm from Utah, so being from Utah, people go 10 miles over the speed limit all the time. I didn't realize that was a crime here. They stopped.
Now I know if I ever visit.
Yeah, they slapped me with $189 fine and ticket. I haven't had a speeding ticket in a decade.
Hmm, I wish I could say the
Okay.
same.
The last time I got a speeding ticket was in 2015. And that ticket, I remember, I only paid $60 for.
I recall every time I've gotten a new car, I end up with a couple speeding tickets in the following year. True with every single car that I've had.
But what's weird to me is like, I got this speeding ticket, right? And you would think, okay, well, maybe this would be a warning. Maybe this would be, hey, slow down next time. No, it was someone telling me, hey, I saw you swerve around that truck and you were speeding way too fast. Yet I wasn't swerving. I was trying to get away from a semi truck and away from someone who was tailgating me, thinking that I wasn't going to get pulled over, but the person
Perspective.
who was tail. But this goes to show you what happens when you police people.
Wait, my brother just, or my brother-in-law just got home.
Ah, okay. We'll wrap this up here pretty soon. We only have about 10 minutes left. But I think, that goes to show you like when you police people that way, right? What is typically the mindset of how people act?
Defensively,
Exactly.
predictably.
For me, because like I said, I'm a Buddhist, that leads to very timid patterns of behavior. I'm a very timid person. So what did I do when I got my driver's license out? I was shaking the whole way, very anxious, and yet I got nothing but death glares. And
I
so,
have to share a story. One time when I was speeding in Tooele, it's kind of about 40 miles out from Salt Lake City. It's pretty country out there, and I see an officer who I definitely profiled as a redneck walking towards my car, and I just decided to fake something. And in an accent that does not belong to me, I said, "I was going a little fast there, wasn't I, officer?" He said, "Yeah, you were." Instantly friendly with the familiar accents that he recognized. He went back to his truck and came back nodding and said, "I'm going to let you off with a warning. Please try to go a little slower." And that is the first warning I'd had in a very long time. When I talk like myself, I tend not to get warnings.
well, and I think the issue that a lot of people have is that a lot of people fear power.
Mhm.
I'm no exception. Um, I have a ton of ideas on how we can fix politics, how we can fix religion, how we can fix emotional relationships. Yet I'm the one who fears all of these power structures because in my mind they're more restrictive and protective than they are reciprocal and looking for, harmony or a balancing in a way to fix things.
I think that's one reason I'm actually grateful for growing up in a bit of a hood. Like I wasn't surrounded by gang members, but I knew them. And I got to learn their ways. I got to learn their evasive tactics around police and authority. And because of them, I got to learn that their power is only there when they're present. Like the only laws that are true are those that actually get enforced. It's like I learned from this criminal mindset that authority is not all powerful, that the law is not all powerful, that, you know, if criminals can break the law for years at a time before ever getting held to account, what can activists do? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think a lot of people need to understand that when we are in positions where we feel like we're being punished, we're being dogged on, we're being ignored, that we have more power than we think. But I think the bigger issue is that none of us realize how much power we actually have, right? It's that line from A Bug's Life where, you know, the grasshopper is saying, "Oh, did that hurt?" as he's throwing grains at one of his cronies, and then rips the entire lids off of this container holding all of this grain and says, "This is what happens when they realize they have power. They will crush us.
And
Don't let these ants destroy you," right?
if you hear about the stories of Germany during World War II, Germans were very good at following the law. And there's a reason that one SS officer could walk into a group of 100 and tell them all what to do. It's not because the one man was stronger than 100. It's because they had certain patterns of behavior and a respect for a law, even when it was unrighteous, even when they knew it was wrong. So it's like if we get over that completely docile, completely subservient mindset, then unrighteous laws tend to start falling apart. We tend to start enforcing and supporting only the ones that are good, that we can stand behind morally.
Exactly. And so, but
Ethically.
we're wrapping up here, and I think this has been a very good conversation. And I think we need to have more open conversations and just go with where these conversations take us, right? Um, I really do believe that if we are to understand not just the divine and the temporal, we also need to understand what is unfair and what is both cosmic and karmic justice.
I would add one
Both
thing. We have to have the boldness to be wrong and still move forward. We're always
exactly,
going to be wrong in something, but if we just stand still, we're going to be mowed over by someone else's will and someone else's idea of the right way to do things.
exactly. It's just like that hoaxology website I was telling you about earlier. A lot of the right wingers have gotten together and they started banding themselves together as though they were making a raft. And I think what's wild, let me go ahead and see if I can share this with everybody.
And creating their own echo chamber, which they have been trying to do multiple times, and it always falls apart because they invite the same chaos that chased them away from the rest of society back into their own circles, and it creates chaos again.
Exactly. Like, look at this. Are you seeing this? Like,
Yeah.
hoaxology. They literally created this website called the American Debunk to try and show what is reality. But what is disgusting to me is that all of this, like this Rupar video editing style,
Mhm.
guess what that's common with?
What?
That is common with pundits who are op-ed reporters, right?
Okay.
If you watch CNN, if you watch MSNBC, if you watch CBS, okay, even ABC, any of the big four, you watch them all of them will tell you exactly what's happening, but they have dedicated shows, just like The View, things like that, all throughout the day. Those are op eds, those are opinions. Those aren't facts. They might have a list of facts to go over, but they're going to share their opinion based on those facts.
Of course. And they have a message to press. Never believe, especially with these big corporate media sources, they always have a message to press. That's good for the corporate executives sponsoring them.
That's also
And
true.
the only ones that they really tell the truth on are the ones that have a neutral effect on the money behind the news.
I was what so I you know how like people were talking about the neo-Nazi stuff back from 2017, 20
We do
I
have to
think it
really
was
stop. This is
2017.
sort of intruding on my sister's household.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry. So you know how all of that was happening. But what long story short, I decided to go back and double check my biases because at the time I believed that the left was manipulating video footage from news organizations. I went on ABC, CNBC, NBC, all of the major networks, every single one, including Fox. And what did I find? The only news organization that cropped out audio to give a cut to a different news story was Fox News. The rest of them listened to the entire presidential address before commenting on it.
Well, they did classify themselves as an entertainment, not a news company. So
That's also
yeah,
true. So, but there you have it. This is our first episode of What's Going On. Um, we didn't run into Junior this evening, but maybe we'll catch him on the next time. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Ben? Any final words of wisdom?
I think I've pretty well wrapped it up.
Oh, that
Probably.
was
we
aggressive.
we just got to keep
Well,
thinking for ourselves and be merciful enough not to mow over anybody else's opinions, and yet be bold enough to be willing to be some small percentage wrong if it means you get to be more of an activist.
I agree.
Otherwise,
Next
you're just
time,
paralyzed and not
yeah,
contribute.
I totally agree with that. Just as we're wrapping up here, next time we do this, I'll do a little bit or job at scheduling this out in advance. But what we are going to be discussing next time is something a little bit more exciting than religion and politics and a little bit of culture. We're going to be talking about our favorite comics and media that we grew up with, how it's impacted us, shaped our worldview, and how that has shaped who we are. So that'll be
You'll
a fun
definitely be hearing
conversation.
about The Simpsons, and you may get some voice impressions. So
Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
look forward to it.
Anyway, this has been an episode of the Platypus Playground, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.